Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CTMP 60 podcast. This is our 8th episode in this series as we trace the storied history of Canadian Tire Motorsport Park back through the days of old Mosport, of course. Our guests today are a father and son duo who have spent their careers promoting Canadian motorsport through journalism, public relations, and marketing, of course, including racing events at CTMP. Sid Priddle started off as a motorsport reporter in the early 1960s, covering racing events at Mosport and around Canada, before becoming more involved on the PR side and eventually working for the agency that was a subsidiary of Mosport owners Harvey, Hudes, and Camin. Sid's long career eventually earned him a well-deserved induction into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame in 2016. Sid's son Jerry got the racing bug from his dad, no doubt, much like myself, and eventually worked for Mosport in the public relations side in the 1980s before leaving to go work for his dad. After a stint working for Bridgestone, he returned to Mosport for what he calls his second tour of duty. And today, Jerry runs his own PR company and has been heavily involved with PR at CTMP over the last decade, and I consider him one of my mentors. Both Sid and Jerry carry years and years of experience in the sport, and along with it, many, many stories, of course. So we hope you enjoy, and without further ado, here they are, Sid and Jerry Priddle. Were you born in Montreal, Sid?
No, I was born in St. John, New Brunswick.
Oh, okay, wow.
And moved to Montreal, early 50s, grade 6, whatever age that was.
Right.
And then subsequently moved around different places in Montreal. Ended up at the Montreal Star, where I met my wife.
Where's a Montreal Star?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Didn't know that?
No, I did not know that.
I was a motorsport writer for a while. After a while, I was told to cover motorsport because I was a low man on totem pole at the
time. Whoops.
That was the day when you had the Gazette was the morning paper and the Star was the afternoon.
Oh,
that's right.
Huh.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. I was a Globe and Mail delivery boy.
Oh, so early starts for you.
Well, I delivered the Gazette before I moved to the Star Sports Department. But yeah, Chris Allen was the motorsport writer at the Gazette.
And did you have any interest in motorsport before you got put on the beat, so to speak?
That's a good question to ask.
No, actually, no. When my boss called me in to say I had to cover motorsport, I said, I can't even drive a car. So he said, well, you're low man on the totem pole, so it's all yours. So but it turned out great for a variety of reasons. So
yeah. Well, we're rolling. This is kind of just a very casual. The setting for the podcast we found is just like hanging out, reminiscing, telling stories. So I'm very glad that you guys can both join us. But yeah, we're kind of already rolling into it. So I guess maybe if you want to talk about, you kind of got put on this beat and then ended up at what was Mosport in 1961. So what was that? What was that like?
That was my. I went to the sports editor to tell him I wanted to go cover that race, and he said, "Well, if we use your story, we'll cover your expenses." And there was a fella in the composing room who was a motorsport nut. So I drove to Mosport with him in his 544 Volvo, slept in the car on corner 10.
Yeah.
And, but I had a media pass, got the story done, interviewed Moss. And at that time, Moss was married to or dating Katie Wilson.
Oh, right. Right.
And he mentioned something to Katie that, geez, for a kid who didn't know anything about motorsport, that was a pretty good story. Well, the Molson family and the McConnell family, who owned the Star, traveled in the same circuits, and Katie happened to mention it to McConnell, what Moss said. And McConnell phoned the sports department and said, okay, I want that kid on the motorsport beat, and I want motorsport recognized as a major sport from now on. That's how it happened. So there you go. Yeah.
Thank you, Katie Molson.
Yeah. And we all know about David McConnell. So when he raced, but yeah, that's how it all happened.
Did you interview Moss before the race or after, or was it both? Or?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty easy interview from, he led you down the path, especially when you knew nothing about the sport, but he was very easy to deal with. Yeah.
Wow. That's so cool. What was that event like?
I mean, I don't know what the attendance was, but the place was absolutely jam-packed. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, it set a record for a single day Canadian sporting event.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, it was even bigger than the Grey Cup.
Wow. That's amazing. And so it was a pretty insane event then.
Well, what I do remember are the lineups trying to get in. So off the 400, it was even bad. Off the 401, rather. And all the way through Bowmanville. None of us knew the back roads in those days. So.
And who were some of the other drivers that you got to talk to that weekend?
Oh, Olivier Jeannevian, Jochen, what was his name? Jochen Moss, or not Jochen Rent, but anyway.
Maybe Joe Bonnier?
Was it Joe Bonnier, yes.
Okay, yeah.
As a matter of fact, Betty thought Joe Bonnier was the greatest. And they were staying at the Park Plaza. And we happened to walk in front of the garage exit. And Bonnier almost hit her. He touched her with his car. So that made her day. So, but all of them in that era were easy to deal with. I mean, they were so, they weren't the way Formula One went. But they were very agreeable to press conferences, very agreeable to one-on-one interviews in between sessions. It didn't seem to bother them race day or what kind of pressure they were under.
Wow. That's amazing. And so that's it's pretty crazy that you just from that interview and it kind of snowballed into. Do you feel like that weekend kind of set you on a career path with motorsport?
Oh, there's no question, because the story ended up front page sports, which was unheard of in those days for motorsport in a major newspaper. So yes, and
wow,
front page of the Montreal Star.
What's that?
Front page of the Montreal Star.
Front page of the sports section.
Oh, front page of the sport. Yeah, still front page of the sports section. Wow.
Yeah, amazing.
And then you followed up with nice of Peter Ryan to win the race in the fall that year.
In October of that year, Peter won I guess they called it the Canadian Grand Prix. It was really sports racing cars.
Yeah.
But he beat Moss and the Pedro Rodriguez brothers, all of the big names, international names. Wow. And he was in I think I'm looking at it here on my wall. Yeah, and he drove it for Comstock. Drove the car for Comstock.
Wow. Oh wow.
The Lotus 19.
What was he like? I've only heard stories,
Peter?
Obviously.
Oh, yeah. He was cool. I mean, he was he was a fairly well-off boy, but I don't know whether you knew that he was a big skier, and his desire was to be skiing in the Olympics.
Oh wow.
He broke his leg. Oops. And if you recall, around that era, Sterling Moss also broke his leg. And Moss used a pedal set up in the hospital to strengthen his leg. And Peter did the same thing. Wow. And it was from there that a lot of stories came out about skiers having the same feeling in their bum, lack of description, for racing cars.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, Peter, but he was a very, very aggressive driver and smooth. That's what I remember about him, and easy again to deal with.
Yeah. Wow. And so, where did it go from there after your you kind of you were getting established as the motorsport writer? Did you cover a lot of events at Mosport, or?
Yeah, pretty well all the events from
Okay.
then on at Mosport, and then some of the local events. And there was a racetrack called Saint Etienne, which was an airport circuit on the border of Quebec and Ontario. And that was owned and run by the MG Car Club. At the time, Russ St. Croix was the president of the club. Okay. So there was a lot of regional races there.
Yeah.
So I did cover all of those events.
And then how did you get involved with the IndyCar event in '67? Were you working PR, or were you working in the newspaper business still?
Oh, no, in '67?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was actually, I had been working for Track and Traffic magazine, which was by Norm Namero. And then I was approached by PR company, PRSL, to join them to handle the first Formula One race in '67.
Okay.
But in addition to that, John Bassett Jr. at that time was a good friend of the president of PRSL. So we ended up promoting the Indy Telly race as well, which was split in two heats, I guess is what it was.
Right. Yeah.
That actually was the first time those cars ever appeared on a road course.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And I do remember a couple of them pedaled to the middle down to corner one and kept going.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they didn't know much about turning left and right.
Yeah. What were those guys like? Because there's a bit of a different group than the European drivers, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, they were Southern boys, almost on the verge of having a cigar or cigarette while they're driving their cars. But I mean, there were some great drivers in those days. It was the Andrettis and the Unsers and Wally Dallenbach. I remember he came in to do advanced promotion, and we didn't have to pay those guys to do that. That was the marvel of it. And it really allowed them to allowed the media to get close and understand them. And that was sort of my PR strategy, if you wish. Having been a journalist, I said, what does a journalist nowadays want to hear from a race driver, or what does he want to know about it? So that was sort of my direction that I followed as a PR person.
Yeah.
And it's not true, Ron, what they say. PR does not stand for profit and revenge.
I've never heard that one.
Certainly not in PR and as a driver, I can tell you. Yeah.
No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I heard, if I'm reading some of my notes that I got advanced, right, that you had a bit of a story with AJ Foyt. Was that the same weekend?
With AJ Foyt.
7, or maybe I messed that up.
Wasn't there a time you were driving Foyt, or maybe it was another IndyCar driver, and you were going along the 401 at maybe a tad over the limit?
Oh, no, that was Sterling Moss.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We were taking him out to CFTO for an interview, and I got pulled over. And we were on I forget now who the sports guy was then, maybe Pat Marsden, but maybe even earlier. And the police officer pulled me over and said, "Who do you think you are, Sterling Moss?" And I said, no, but would you like to
No.
meet him?
No way.
And he let me go. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Nobody's
that's him
sitting
sitting
right.
next to you.
But you had to do it real quick because the moment the officer showed up, Moss was ready to yak at him. And I thought, oh no, I got to get out of here quickly.
I was going to
Yeah.
say it might have had a different outcome if you had AJ Foyt with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
AJ Foyt wouldn't have been fun. No.
That is awesome. Who do you think you are showing Moss? No, that'd be him.
Yeah.
That is so awesome.
Yeah. No,
That's
just
great.
walked right into it. We couldn't have written it.
No, you can't make that up. That's awesome.
And then later on, I guess that year in '67, that was the first Canadian Grand Prix.
Yes.
What kind of involvement did you have at that event?
Mainly just doing publicity, and then
Okay.
it was more of a job of what I did is a lot of backgrounders as news releases on the drivers, because it was really getting the local media to understand and know who they were and what their personalities were and what their achievements were. So a lot of it, as opposed to say a news release, it was a backgrounder on the driver himself.
Right.
And that was the way that we were able to get the media to be familiar with who these Europeans were that were coming over here. So.
What was the more because there were a few Canadian storylines for that weekend, right? So what was more the buzz? Was it about Epi being in the other Lotus, or was it about Alpes, or who was the kind of the more bigger story?
Alpes was in that. I forget now what. I forget what car he drove. To be honest
Okay.
with you, I think the stories were still. The Canadians might have got lost in the stardom, quite frankly.
Okay.
Not unusual, but when people were saying, well, this is a world champion of this, world champion of that. Epi was a good story. And subsequently, I think it was a year later that Bill Brack drove in the F1 race at Montreal, I believe. But yeah, Epi, Epi, as you all know, was a very aggressive race driver and very good in the Formula 5000 series as well. But yes, it was great to see a Canadian, excuse me,
Yeah.
mixing it up with the big stars.
Yeah. From what I managed to hear him tell that story, but he didn't get much practice time in the car because I think Clark crashed on one of the early practice sessions and had to use his car.
Yeah.
So he got like no
correct.
practice
Yes.
time.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good memory. I forgot about that.
Crazy. I can't imagine going into, your first Formula One race and you've got basically no practice time.
No.
Insane.
Well, it put everyone on pretty well on an equal plane because it rained. So
Yeah.
it was a messy day. It very was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was Jack Brabham who won that race. And when it came to giving him his prize money, he just asked for it in a garbage bag. He walked in with his cash in a garbage bag. Oh dear.
That's not the first story I've heard about cash in garbage bags at Mosport.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
So how did you eventually went to work for Harvey and Bernie, right?
Yes, there was a company called MRP.
Okay.
That was run by Len Coates at the time. And Len moved on. And so and then Chris Allen, they were thinking of hiring Chris Allen, but then they came to me and asked me if I would do it. And I changed the name to Media Relations and Promotions because I didn't want to be tagged strictly motorsport. And we did that we did a lot of Labatt's work and Can-Am work in those days. And then we took on the STP sponsorship of Bill Brack when he raced.
Oh, cool.
And it was made the deal with a fellow by the name of John Gardella, who was sort of Andy of the North, if you wish. Andy Granatelli of the North, we used to call him. So, yeah. But I mean, that was a lot of fun. That was, and that whole, if you know Bill, he wasn't a great comfort with media, but he knew how to get publicity. And I remember there was a race in Winnipeg, and the big rivalry was between he and a guy by the name of Bertel Roos.
Yes, I remember Bertel Roos.
And Bill called, I wasn't at that race, and Bill called me after the race and he said, Sid, I think I got us some ink. I said, why? He said, well, I threw a rock at Bertel. Oh dear.
Would that have been the track back was it Gimli?
Gimli, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also remember a race with Bill, although it was at Montreal, but his other big rivalry at the time was Kiki Rosberg.
Yeah.
And I remember the two of them were on the front row. And Bill walked over to him just before they were to get in the cars and said, you know, Kiki, only one of us is going to come out of the corner. And I'll be damned if Kiki didn't back off. And once you got the lead at Tremblant, you were there. You were set.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of psyche.
Ron, I think I cut you off. You were going to say something.
Yeah, no, my question for Sid was, so this company was owned by Harvey as well as it was like a subsidiary of the racetrack.
Yeah.
Media company.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Bernie and Harvey were the two bosses.
Right.
And Harvey, as you know, understood marketing for sure.
Oh yeah.
Bernie, but Bernie was the sort of the business tough guy, if you wish. But I do remember them, me saying to Bernie one day and saying, you know, I really am putting a lot of miles on my old car. And out of the blue, he said, well, go get another one and we'll pay for it. So, yeah, exactly. Bernie. Yeah. But they were, they let me do my job, and that was what was good about it. So I felt that I had a pretty good handle on what needed to be done.
So the managing of motorsport property on behalf of Labatt's so that included support of the racetrack, but other things as well, as you mentioned, STP.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, I was very fortunate in the days that I worked for PRSL after I did that first F1 race it was for players, but I did all of the players' motorsport and eventually all their sports programs after that, the tennis, the golf, and then even the sponsorship when they switched over to individuals, starting with young Jacques and Greg Moore, of course, and that was their whole strategy, was switching from events to individuals.
Right.
And that's what led me down the path to doing the Dario Paul Tracy program with Cool, because Brendan Williamson was owned by British American Tobacco, which also owned Imperial Tobacco, and the president of Imperial was Bob Benson, who went to the US. That's how I got that assignment.
Wow. And what year would that have been? Was that 90?
Let me see.
Would have been late 90s because
Andy
you were,
Evans.
Late
yeah,
90s?
you were saying it was after the Andy Evans era.
Yes, that's right. Yes, because you're right. Because everyone, I thought we were going to end up moving to Vegas. And if you recall, Andy was going to buy Las Vegas Speedway.
Oh,
And it was a Labor Day weekend. And what happened was that a variety of the vice presidents decided that they just didn't want to work with Andy anymore. And so here I was out in Vegas wondering what I'm going to do. And I got a call from Armand Torquia in Montreal saying, can we use your name in a presentation to Brown & Williamson? And I knew that Bob Benson was there. So, or Bob Bexon rather. And I said, sure. I said, Armand, this will dictate my fee.
good for you.
Yeah.
Jerry, what do you remember about those days at the track with your dad and being a kid and all that?
Well, I mean, I was really fortunate because I had the opportunity to go out. So he'd be working. A lot of times my mom would come out. So I'd have some parental supervision, but, you know, definitely a different era as like a 10, 11, 12-year-old where, you know, I'll be back in a couple of hours and, you know, could shoot out and start wandering the grounds and, you know, walk in the paddock, walk in the garage, and you know, just go hang out. And you know, I really remember the garage as well, and that, you know, that opportunity to go in the back door, which now would be around the area of where the back entrance of Braden is, and just walking down the length of the garage, and, you know, whether it be Formula One or Can-Am teams. And you could really get a sense, because you could see them all one after the other, of, you know, who had their act together and who was scrambling. And, you know, I do remember in some of those early years, I loved the UOP Shadow, but they would always let me down on the track, right? Until maybe later in the series. And they always seemed to be the guys that were putting the work in late at night. Yeah, so just, you know, good opportunities and access to drivers. I think probably for me the strongest memory was a time that Sid arranged for me to meet with Jackie Stewart. And the meeting happened after Jackie had been knocked out of the F1 race. So, you know, I was thinking, okay, well, this probably isn't going to happen. And then I remember, I think it was my mom actually that said, okay, you're up. He's in this car. And I went over, there was someone driving the car. I got in the back seat with him, and we were basically driving slowly across the paddock with throngs of people, you know, kind of pushing in on the car, trying to get a look at Jackie. But he was laser focused on me, you know, talking. I was asking him questions. And yeah, it was a cool feeling. It's probably the only
completely ignored me. I remember.
I'm not a kid.
Well, I think it was a little cuter than you were back then, maybe. I don't know. But
Well, how old were you then?
Like, I would have been probably about 12.
11. Yeah, so it must have been that 69 race where Jackie Eakes took him out at turn 2.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Could have, yeah, boy. So I would have been younger. I would have been 9 then.
Yeah.
So, and then, yeah, just to kind of in that era, a couple of years later, I got my first job in life, and that was selling programs at Mosport. So we used to get paid 3 cents a program, and we worked our butts off. You know, like I would be, I don't know how many times I would walk up and down that grandstand, the big front straight.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it was good. And a name that, like, anyone who used to follow Wheelspin News way back when, was a guy that used to work for Harvey at Mosport, and then he went into the publishing business. He acquired Wheelspin News, and that was Pete Chapman. He bought it from Dizzy Dean, I believe.
That's right.
And so Pete looked after all of us program sellers, because we were all kind of in that, age 11 to 16 range, and we would sleep at the tower at night and, get to go down to the garages. I did my first ever track walk with one of your previous guests, Paul Chater.
Yeah.
And, he showed me around, and it was a good experience. It was a lot of fun.
So the nights you slept in the tower, you didn't touch Harvey's water bottle, did you?
No, sir. No, that water bottle magically appeared Sunday mornings, right? It was water all the way through until Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, question, I guess. Or go ahead, Ron.
I want to know.
sorry, what did he change it to?
Yeah.
Usually it was gin. I ended up going to work for Harvey in 1982, and that was one of my first assignments on the race weekends. I didn't buy the gin, but I had to buy olives, forks. There were a whole bunch of other, different garnishes that I had to get. All had to be approved by Jim Clayton, because he was the
Right. Yes.
the Somali. I'm sure there's another word for it, but he was the martini expert, and
The connoisseur.
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys can both talk about it. But what was Harvey's kind of like a huge figure in this history of the track, and so what was he like to work for?
Go ahead, Sid. You lead.
I found him very easy to work for, demanding. Harvey used to be the accountant for track and traffic at one time.
Wow.
And he caught on to the media marketing business very quickly. So he knew what he was talking about, and he had a lot of great ideas of how to put bums in seats, for lack of a better description. And as long as you understood that part of the game, then you got along very well with him, and he admired everything you did. And also, he would congratulate you on a success.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, for me, I went to work there as a 22-year-old. So I'd spent a couple of years before working at Wheelspin, which I'll come back to in a sec.
Sure.
But I just, and I remember Harvey when I was a kid out to the track, and he was, a giant then. Like, you just knew he was someone that was important. So I was pretty intimidated for that first year or two, and always, concerned about a misstep in that. But as time went on, you also learned that there were some different Harveys. The Harvey that would be at that office in Alness, who was, to me, that was the accountant Harvey, and I guess some of the promoter. And then at the track, just very focused on what was happening, in all aspects, all facets of the track. But then when you would, meet Harvey in more of a social setting, just a very happy-go-lucky guy who enjoyed being with people, enjoyed the company, and it was just, was a good person. And I got to know him, much better kind of later in my time at Mosport, probably like around 86, 87, because we were scouting out a couple of other, actually would have been a little earlier, probably about 84. We were scouting out some other forms of motorsport that Harvey wanted to get into, and that's that promoter side of him that was shining through. So one of them was hydroplane boat racing. So I went to a couple of events with him stateside. One of them, actually, Miles Brandt came with us down to Toledo and checked out that race. And then another one I went to, and the name's going to escape me, but it was in New Hampshire. and one of the big thunderboat races, as they were calling them then. So these would have been the same boats that ran at Valleyfield in Quebec every year, kind of, you know, their version of the Indy 500. And yeah, I mean, he you know, talked about family, talked about the business, and then the other trip that I'll always remember, and again, Miles was with us. We made the pilgrimage down to Eldora Speedway. And this was when Harvey was thinking of, and ultimately did build what he wanted to call Ascot North.
Mhm.
And the promoter then was the guy by the name of Earl Baltez. And like he looked like a character out of Smokey and the Bandit, right? He was, and I remember driving. It was dark, so it might have been late in the season, late summer, early fall. And we were out in the middle of nowhere. It was just like cornfields and farmers' fields. And it was almost like Field of Dreams, that over in the distance, you could see this glow in the horizon. As you got closer, you started to realize there's a racetrack here. And there were, it was just phenomenal. It was like coming out of nowhere into this whole other world of, you know, of people and color. And we you know, found our spot, went and got our passes. Earl Baltez looked after us with top-notch passes, and then proceeded to take Harvey, with, you know, Miles and I kind of tagging along through each of the facets of the business. And this is all while the racing's happening out on the track. And I remember Harvey's jaw almost dropping when Earl took us into his kitchen and just showed like the process of, you know, how he was bringing people in and how they were cooking and things like that. And then, I mean, the show itself, you know, for anyone who's seen a World of Outlaws show, it overwhelms the senses. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but you know, so a lot of time to talk to him, and you know, just learn about his philosophies of life and business. And you know, I can, I've worked for Sid, I've worked for some other people, I've worked for Miles, so I've got to be careful what I say, but I think probably one of the toughest days in my life was the day that I had to go in and say to Harvey, I was going to move on. You know, it made it easier because I was moving on to join Sid in a new venture that he was launching. But yeah, no, I had a lot of respect for him. And yeah, it was, and one of the, you know, the saddest days was the day that, you know, that we learned he had passed. So, you know, we can, all the accolades that he gets, he deserves. And just, yeah, one of my favorite people.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's amazing on this podcast how we've heard from basically every person so far has spoke about how Harvey gave them some sort of opportunity or gave them some sort of advice or
Oh, for sure.
did something for them that helped, you know, their career. And it's just like incredible to me that it's not just the track, it's, you know, the people and Harvey, of course. So
Yeah, and you know, the other thing I'll just add, it kind of struck me now, but from a management style, he, you know, one of the things was kind of interesting because his son Nelson Hudes joined about the same time that I did, and our direct report was F. David Stone, you know, probably one of the greatest. Well, I was going to say Canadian, but probably one of the greatest motorsport photographers, regardless of what country they come from. And, you know, Dave was a good guy to work for, but one of Harvey's philosophies was to move us around the operation. So, you know, one year you would be working in PR and someone else would kind of work with Dave on developing the marketing program. And then, so, you know, I would be on one and then Nelson would be doing the other one. And then the year after we would swap roles. Everyone there had to sell. That was part of our responsibility. So we had our, you know, our call lists and people that we would go out and visit and help, you know, bring the revenue in, help pay for our paychecks. But it gave all of us a good grounding on different aspects of the, you know, the marketing side of the business. And, you know, I think that experience, I think made it easier for Sid to bring on, you know, still a relatively young buck to join him on, what was going to be some new motorsport programs that he was working on.
Yeah. I've also heard that Harvey had some interesting ideas when it came to security, and it's something that we've heard a couple times on this podcast. But I've heard there's a story, Sid, about a guard dog.
Yeah, it was during an era where he did have a lot of problems with campers and controlling the rowdyism, et cetera, et cetera. And at one point, he built a wall around Mosport to try and prevent people from coming in or climbing in.
Right.
But what he did, part of that program was that he hired a security company who used Bouvier security dogs, guard dogs. And one day, for whatever reason, I got tricked into putting on the suit to go out and face one of these Bouviers, and the trainer would command the dog to come and get me and grab me on the arm. And those suits had steel rods going up, and I could feel the pressure of the dog's jaw right through the iron. Except the difficulty was that when the trainer told him to stop, he was having a hell of a time. So he wasn't going to stop, and he didn't until the trainer came over and pulled him off me. And of course, smartass, what was your comment?
Oh, so yeah. So I was there at the time. I think this is when you were with MRP. And I remember making a joke. So it was a demo that Sid was doing for some media that were there on site. And I'm pretty sure we did it down in the paddock.
We did.
And so, I'm just a smart ass kid hanging around, and Sid's got this suit on him. He looked like the Michelin Man with the thing on, kind of like a baseball catcher's face mask. And so I jokingly said, I hope your will's up to date, Dad, before we do this. But then when the dog attacked, like, I was genuinely concerned, right? Because
became very real.
Yes, it's right. Like the owner was calling him off, and no concern, and it's like called the dog again, wasn't listening, and all of a sudden he broke into a sprint over to where the dog and I mean, I'm maybe misremembering this, but I thought the dog actually got you down on the ground.
Close. Well, he pulled my arm down. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. What I learned later is that the jaw pressure of a Bouvier was 400 pounds per square inch.
Wow.
But the purpose, I think the purpose of the demo is
they don't attack, they break bones is what they do compared to other security dogs.
What they wanted to do, because everyone knew about German Shepherds and Dobermans, but not as many people knew or feared Bouviers. So I think the end result is Sid's demo helped with security at the track.
Things you do for a client, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, there's always another PR guy to come along if something like that.
Exactly. Oh dear.
So maybe Jerry, you want to talk a little bit more about the 80s, and just working at Mosport, working for Harvey, because that was a special time for motorsport in our country, just with all the homegrown talent and everything that was coming up in those years, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, there's been lots of golden eras, but I think for anyone of our generation, or someone of your age, Sam, who's listened to anyone of our generation wax on about the glory days, certainly the 80s would have been a highlight. Yeah. And my timing in starting at Mosport in 82 was fortunate, because they had just landed a long-term, I think it was 5-year deal with Labatt's to be the sponsor. And and the series at the time were pretty healthy. So you had Can-Am, you had IMSA GT, and Labatt's spent a ton of money on marketing the event. So it wasn't just the money that they paid to the track, but it ended up getting integrated into what they did to sell beer, and they did a good job of it. So through when I think back on some of the races that stand out for me, as far as the major pro series, I think probably the one that I enjoyed the most, and in large part because there was a Canadian connection, and it was kind of a cool brand at the time, and that was the Labatt GT. I want to say, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think it would have been probably about 83, 84. But it was the year that Bill Adam was driving for Bob Tullius, and Bill ended up winning the race in the Jag. And it was one of those weekends where the Jag was the focal point of the promotion going into the event. Bill came up and did some advanced work, and everything just kind of clicked. And I just remember the energy and the emotion when they pulled into that winner's circle, the one that used to be beside the tower. And it was a good, happy day all around for Canadian motorsport. And then a couple of years later, two events or two races stand out. And again, one that I'll never forget, and as a connection with Ron and with your uncle Rob, and that was the very first Players GM race at the track. And it wasn't the feature, but it sure as heck felt like it was the feature race. It was the one that people were talking about. I think there had been, and people will correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I think they had an entry list that was kind of in around 50 to begin with, and then it just seemed as we were getting a couple of weeks out, the momentum kept picking up, and there were more drivers wanting to come in and more wanting to come in, and they went over 70 entries.
Yeah, I think it was 76 is what
76.
Really?
I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and
so Sam, the irony of that whole program was that GM never raced, never went racing, and this series was one of the few times that they were front and center in a series, and it was all put together with a fellow by the name of Marty Shenhall, and who worked in their engineering department. John Powell had some input, but even then they had to go to Detroit to get permission to become part of the series. And at that time I was working for Stan Houston and doing Players, so it was perfect for Players to be able to come in and sponsor that program along with GM.
So I don't know what it would have been like, Ron, for you in the car with that size of field around you. I would have been up in the media center, and just the mass of cars, like from the start finish line all the way down, corner 10 back towards 9. And from the media center, those first few laps were hairy. Can't imagine what it was like for the drivers.
Yeah, I think they ended up because of the number of entries, they split up qualifying, and then they ended up with a qualifying race to determine the final 10 starters after qualifying sessions. And I don't know, I'm guessing there was at least 40, whatever the maximum allowed on the track is what they started. It would have been 40 plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was just, it was cool for me as a driver, just because this was, I drove the car to the track, and suddenly
that's right.
This car you drove to the track, you're now in a pretty big deal, and you got a chance provided you can drive it home, you might drive home with $5,000 for the win.
Right.
And another $1,000 in points money. So
yeah.
Which is what drove the number of entries. It was close to 80 drivers thinking I'm getting that five or six grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was that players who would have put up that prize money? Or?
Yeah.
Wow. Just a huge investment, right? For the
Yeah,
because there was also
in the first year that the two, they had two races that were live telecasts as well.
wow.
Right. Yeah.
Back then, what was CTV's Wild World Sports? That's where.
Yeah.
That they ended up using certainly at the Molson Indy in Quebec, which was the first race I won, the San Air Trial. Chris Economaki was the color commentator, and that's where I met Chris for the first time. Was there, and Chris ended up being helping me with getting a visa to race in the States.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Anyway, carry on with the Priddles. Never mind me.
Yeah, no.
Oh no.
Yeah, and just to flesh out Golden Era, I mean the Rothmans Porsche series and the Export A Formula 2000 series, and of course the Honda Michelin, which
Yes.
probably everyone loved it, but probably didn't get enough credit for starting that Golden Era, and the work that Ralph Lucio did on that series. It was a lot of fun, and then it was a gas for me a couple of years later when I hooked up with Sid at his company that we're working on players, and that was my day-to-day job was to work on the Players GM series in Eastern Canada, and then we had another person by the name of Sylvia Proudfoot who was based in Calgary and looked after that, and those when they would do the year-end shootouts, there was just it really had kind of a Grey Cup Super Bowl big deal feel to it, and in a lot of cases the first time that a lot of these East and West drivers would meet, and then probably the one other Mosport related race that, again, not the biggest one that I ever worked at, but I would say probably one of the most just special is probably the best way I can describe it. And that was again in '86, and that was the Budweiser 2-4, which was the first 24-hour race at that track. It was the World Challenge Series cars, and so very much I think, Ron, they would have been showroom stockish like the Players GM.
Showroom stock-ish, yes.
Okay.
not quite as out of the showroom, drive them to the track as the Camaros and Firebirds of the GM series, but
yeah, but like a gorgeous field of cars, at least a gorgeous field of cars when the race started. And what I remember, we slept at the track. We would take our little breaks, and I've never been to Le Mans, but I guess this would be the Canadian version. You'd grab an hour or two here and there, and I just remember being out walking the back of the pit boxes, those wooden pit boxes, and you would see like two crew members. One would be using a tire as a pillow, grabbing some sleep, and someone else would be folded over like this, sleeping. And probably the most strongest memory I have would have been as sunup, and you would just look out across the track, and there was this haze, partly from the dew, but also from all the campfires that were burning at night. And you would start to be able to actually see the cars, because at night in darkness, really, unless you were right at the front straight, what you were seeing were just two headlights. And it almost felt like a scene out of Apocalypse Now, that you would see these cars coming around 9 and 10, and it's almost like they're coming out of the smoke and the fog, and they're just covered in gaffer tape in the front, and repairs that they had to make during the night. And then just the countdown to that that 24th hour, which for any endurance race, I think is kind of a cool thing about are the leaders going to be able to hang in? Can someone mount a challenge? So yeah, for me, when I look back at, you know, my first time, my first era at Mosport, those three ones are probably three that I would put a little star beside.
Oh, very cool.
Maybe just because I jogged my memory talking about Labatt's, but maybe we back it up for a second, talk about the kind of end of the Formula One era in '77, and I don't know, Sid, if you can shed some light on what was going on in that around that time. But the stories I've heard is that Labatt's wanted to put the Formula One race in downtown Toronto. Is that true?
It was partly true, I guess.
Okay.
Certainly, they were looking at, but what happened was, and I'm not sure whether it was Bernie Ecclestone was around in those days, but they talked about the lakeshore and the straightaway, and they said they'd end up in Hamilton. So,
Right.
and going through all the approvals that would have to be done. I mean, subsequently, the Indy managed to do that, but at that time, it wasn't going to happen. So I think that's around the time it ended up moving to Montreal.
Yeah. And what was the culture at the were you still with MRB then, or MP? I'm sorry, what the firm, the PR firm?
I'd have to think where I was at that time, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure. I had some involvement with the race in Montreal at the beginning, but of course, you'd have to be bilingual. So our Montreal office took over most of the management of that race from a PR perspective, but I did the English PR. And then, of course, because of the magnitude of the event, what we used to do is if there wasn't someone from Toronto covering, we would write the stories for the Toronto papers.
Wow.
But Labatt's got their mention and got their publicity extended beyond the Quebec borders.
What was it like to lose the Grand Prix at Mosport, though? Was that kind of a strange feeling? I guess you still had the client, but then it's moving to a different place, right?
Yeah, I don't know that it was, with all the backroom stuff that was going on, it was pretty obvious that it wasn't going to stay there without some huge or significant changes in the racetrack. And it was politics at the Formula One level versus what they could accomplish in Montreal.
Was it coming from the drivers or just from the promoters, the Formula One promoters?
No, it was more the governing body of Formula One. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure stuff was planted with the drivers to talk about the lack of safety and et cetera. The guardrails scared the hell out of them, and I don't blame them. So it was politics, that's all. And it ended up moving there. And, one time the discussion was to alternate them back and forth. But once it got into Montreal, and Montreal was such a international city, it just became, as you know, it became a huge event in the city of Montreal and Canada.
Yeah.
I think the mayor wrote a few checks too to help along the way, the mayor of Montreal.
Oh, yes. No question. Yeah. Yeah.
So what about, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that it didn't hurt that you had the new Canadian star winning the first Canadian Grand Prix on Ile Notre Dame. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was
and spraying Labatt's.
Spraying Labatt's, that's correct. Yeah, but I mean the reaction. It was just chaos. It was unbelievable. Yeah,
it was incredible.
So what was it like then? In I believe in '97 you went to work for Andy Evans. Yeah.
It was an experience.
Yeah.
Andy was an interesting individual. He, I don't know whether you knew it or not, but he was a special advisor, money advisor to Bill Gates.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
Andy had deep, deep pockets. And when I was offered the job, it was his vice president was a fellow by the name of Jack Long, who I'd worked with on the Molson Indy.
Mhm.
And when I walked into the room, it was Andy had just bought Sebring. And when I walked into the meeting room and looked around and saw all of the motorsport talent in one place, it was unbelievable to me. But after the race, the next day, the newspapers had said, car owner, track owner wins Sebring. And I ran into Andy in the lobby and he looked at me. He said, I guess that's not good, is it? I said, no, it's not. So he said, so what do I do? I said, step out of the car. And he looked at me, but he took my advice and he did step out of the car. But Andy, he paid very well. And he did look at other venues he was going to buy. He was going to buy Vegas. In fact, I was out there. We thought we were going to end up moving from Tampa to Vegas, and it was a Labor Day weekend. Betty was out looking for a house, and then I got a call. At that time, 4 or 5 of the vice presidents decided that they had had enough of Andy. I mean, he was different, and so they resigned. And I thought, oh man, here I am in Vegas, no job. What am I going to do? And then I got the call from Montreal to ask if I wanted to be part of the Cool program. So, but he loved the media. He, you know, it was always, Sid, can you get me into what's the, sorry, got brain fade, the big daily USA Today. Can you get me a story? And then I did. So I was his hero in terms of the fact that I was his avenue to get ink. And that's what he really wanted in the end. But he spent, I don't know how much money on motorsport, not just a series. Someone told me he spent 16 mil a year on it. So
Wow.
it's in the 90s.
I'm trying to remember in 97 when I thought it was one of you two who called me to inquire about driving the Ferrari 333 for Andy.
That poster was in the background behind Jerry's head there.
Oh, is that it? Was that
Yeah.
that race? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Andy had bought
Mosport. Sid, I'm thinking it was you that called.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Because I was at Bridgestone at the time.
Because it was all part of our marketing strategy was to get a Canadian that event and in that car.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Yeah. And that's when Andy also had the perception of taking a motor race and making it a big festival weekend. So he did the music concert or festival, whatever it was at that time as well.
Pretty good lineup too.
Pardon me?
And it was a big success.
Huge success. Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I remember getting the call from Andy Evans, and it was, okay, who is this really? You want me to do what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Worked out okay, huh, Ron?
It did. Yeah, I was a little when I drove the car, I insisted on a little bit of track time somewhere, anywhere, prior to the race weekend, and they stopped at Putnam Park, which I was very familiar with, in Indiana, outside Indianapolis. That was our when I
Yeah.
drove the Chevy for Buzz McCall and Will Moody and American Equipment. That was our sort of test track. So I was very familiar with it. So we stopped there, and that was where it was the oh doo doo moment where this thing did not have power steering, and it was with a lot of downforce. It was hard to turn, and I had about a month to try to get hands and forearms in shape. But thankfully, I did get a bit of seat time to. It was like, oh boy, I got a little bit of work to do before I drive this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, he did some good things, and
yeah, no, I was very, very thankful for the opportunity. It was such an awesome car to drive, and got an opportunity to drive the Rolex 24 in '98 for Andy and with Bob Wallach. Yannick
oh right, yes,
and Max Pappas, and it was
wow, yeah.
It was our race to lose, and we did. So
yeah. Oh.
Anyway,
so Andy owned an island off of Vancouver. He had his own island. So, and initially he used to fly from his island in Vancouver to Seattle every day.
Wow.
To go work for Bill Gates.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, he was in and out in a short amount of time. What do you think the reason was for his departure?
He was erratic in dealing, and people just he just bent people the wrong way. Yeah. And a lot of these people were like high end people out of New York. They were people who knew their business really well.
Interesting.
He just overstepped the boundaries. That's all.
I think you had mentioned too that back to that 16 million a year. I mean, he was spending a lot of money, and from what you said, Sid, didn't see that there was going to be an opportunity to turn that around.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, everyone. It wasn't only his money; it was part of the company's money, and that's where he ran aground. So, however. Yeah. We've seen them come and go.
Yes, indeed.
Well, and the good thing, again, I would have been on the sidelines, but there was a pretty rocky era for the track between the period that Harvey passed and Andy bought it. So he at least stabilized it and steadied the waters a bit, and I think probably set the table a bit for Don Panos to come in and do all the great things that he ended up doing.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, and I give Andy the credit for at least realizing that Panos was going to do the track well, and so didn't play games with the sale.
Right.
Very good.
So when did Don buy it? Like 99 or 2000?
It was 98.
Okay. Yeah, 98. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Andy really didn't own it all that long then.
Oh, because I worked for Andy from March 97 till September 97. So it was a short-lived career.
Wow. And then you went to work for an IndyCar, right?
Well, I went to work for the Cool program.
Okay.
With Paul and Dario.
Okay. What was that like?
It was
cool. I couldn't resist.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. The marketing director for Brown & Williams was a guy named Bert Kramer. And, considering all the years I worked for tobacco companies, but I learned more about marketing from Bert than I had in all of my my entire career. They just knew how to get it done, and the whole objective was to get Cool mentions. Well, to start with, the name Cool was easy to get in terms of photographs of the car and the graphics of the car. but also, you know, they made their deal with Barry Green, so it was called Team Cool Green, and there was no mistaking. Paul was the character, no question of that, but he was also very, very important to Cool's marketing program. Dario was more of the businessman, but he was very efficient and got it done on the racetrack without. Paul, as he said, used us the aluminum bumper a lot in his racing career, including on Dario. Yeah.
There seemed like there was so much Canadian content back in those days, and there was, you know, Molson Indy, Toronto, Vancouver, races out west. Was there ever talk about an IndyCar race at Mosport in those days, or that was just out of the question?
No, I think it was talked about, but you know, the whole concept of street racing, which was really a mindset of John Frasco, who was the head of IndyCar at the time, and it was, you know, bring the event to the people. Don't make the people go to the event, and that's why these city races were so successful. Yeah. I mean, I remember the you know, the politics that went through trying to get the race in Toronto. And even though once we got it by city council, excuse, race day, I got a phone call from the front gate. And they said, there's a huge backup here. And the mayor's trying to get in. I said, well, put them in the biggest line there is. So, to prove that we could dominate. You know, I mean, that was 68,000 people were at that race. So,
wow.
And Vancouver was just as successful in that area down on the waterfront.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Did you race there, Dad?
1990 Porsche race, yes.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yes.
So
when did you retire, Sid?
Yesterday.
Yes, sir.
No, well, I'm gonna, you know, after what happened in the Cool program is in 2003, the U.S. Attorney General's banned tobacco sponsorship. Canada, it was never banned, but it was frowned upon.
Yeah.
So around 2003, I sort of went off on my own and decided that I better get out of the away from the tobacco and try and get other things to support myself. So that's really when it started. And then, you know, it's a long story. I went through the motorsport stuff with the tobacco companies, and then eventually ended up trying to remember where I went after that, Jerry, but
well, I mean, when did Edmonton start?
Oh, that was 1990, I think.
Oh, probably a little later than that, but yeah. But so, I mean,
Toronto worked till through 96. And then Edmonton. So Edmonton came after that, somewhere later than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it probably wouldn't have, it might have been some stuff that you worked on, but kind of the next big event would have been when you were hired to do the Edmonton IndyCar race.
Correct.
Which you did for 5 years?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And that was that was a real challenge because the Edmonton Raceway was quite a ways from the city. It was out in the boonies, but it was a very, very good circuit, and the Indy cars adapted very well to it. So it went quite well. And again, politics, I think, or money, whatever. I remember the GM there, he was replaced. And then they went through another GM. So it was on the bubble for a few years regardless.
Yeah.
So then he retired a second time, and then he started working for the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Yeah, which I did my last duty on April 30th this year. So
Wow.
There you go.
I'm doing volunteer work for the March of Dimes.
Excellent.
And you were inducted into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame as well.
Yes, it was. Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome.
First
Congratulations
PR
on
guy?
that. Yeah.
What's that?
I said you were the first PR person, as far as I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I was. Yes. Yeah.
The last, yes.
Yeah.
How is it today, like going to CTMP now after having been there in 1961 at that first race?
Ooh, wow. I haven't been out there trying to remember the last time I was out there. It was within the last couple of years, I believe.
Yeah.
I went out.
I think I remember seeing you at the were you at the Formula One historic weekend?
I'm not sure I was.
Okay.
But I mean, obviously, it's what you saw in '61 was pretty not as modern as what you see today, of course. And
Right.
it was, I mean, there was a lot of things that didn't have, whether the paddock or infield was grass or what have you. It was a very rural racetrack compared to what it is today.
A lot rougher around the edges, very rough around the edges.
Yeah.
And Jerry, of course, you're still involved with us with the racetrack. So
yes, yeah, I came after I did a stint with Bridgestone Firestone for a number of years, and then ventured into like 18 months. I went in a different direction, went to work for the NHL Players Association through Edelman PR. Again, the company that we were involved with at one point, and then joined in 2005. So, you know, I was there on staff for till about 2011, and then, you know, looking at the twilight years and wanted to, you know, take another kick at agency life. And again, you know, I talked about going in and resigning with Harvey and how tough that was. And I was going into Miles and saying, you know, I'm going to move on. I want to make some changes. And, you know, really not knowing what kind of a reception I would get. And he couldn't have been better. And, you know, they then, it was still Mosport then, became my first client. So, and then I picked up one other client, and my third client became what ended up being Canadian Motorsport Ventures. And that was, I mean, it was an exciting period, but it sure was different. I just, I can remember, you know, here, so I'm in my office now, as I call it, the basement dungeon, and I got a phone call from Ron, and said, I've got something that I think you want to be a part of, and I need you to meet me. I think he said tomorrow, or it might have been the day after. It'll be a location out near the airport, and you need to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I had no idea what was coming. I thought it was a new racing program, like a NASCAR program that he was launching, and all of that. And so that morning I got the address, which was Orlando, but I still hadn't pieced it all together. Starting to, you know, wonder. And I remember arriving at reception. Ron came out and greeted me, took me into a room. I signed the paperwork, and then took me into a boardroom. And, you know, there was Carlo and Oh, help me out here.
Al Boughton. Yeah.
Al, sorry, yeah. How could I? Yeah, Al. And that's when I learned. So, anyways, it's kind of funny because I was doing advertising PR work on this hand with Miles and couldn't talk to him, although I knew bloody well he knew what was going on. So, but it was a fun assignment, and I was thankful for this, especially in those early days of my company of getting to work on it. And Ron had brought a great PR company in to work on it with some really good people, and I came in as kind of the motorsport PR guy just to help make sure that we covered those end of things. And again, it was a bit of a different assignment where you couldn't tell them, why they needed to be available and join a conference call because we had big news. And as it turned out that day, the Honda Indy was also making a major announcement. And I can remember talking to motorsport journalists saying, "That's great, but I'm very confident that you're going to want to be a part of what we're doing." And a couple of them just said, "No, I got to carry on and do my assignment over here." And then phoning me after and going, "I guess you were right. I guess I should have been on that conference call." So, yeah. So it's been a good run, and when I think back, probably my first visit to the track would have been around 67, 68. And it's very much a second home for me, and it's great to see what Ron, Linda, and Carlo have done. That I mean, I still can't drive through that tunnel at corner 10 or take a look at that event center without just saying wow. Like it's so impressive, and it's made such a difference on the feel and the vibe of that place. And I don't think there's anything as cool as when you see those big rigs coming on for their parade, above the tunnel and coming in at corner 10 and just kind of kicking off, that whole weekend. And I mean, Sid talked about with the IndyCar races and the street circuits, and that was very much in vogue. I think what we've seen in recent years is kind of a return to those days of the 60s where road courses are cool and hip again, and you walk around the grounds at the track when hopefully we can do that very soon, and you see families camping, and just that opportunity to get outside. And it's very much like the tide, and there's a good high tide coming, and I think IMSA has done a great job. I think we're starting to see health return to the domestic series, and there's just so many good stories that that are still to be told. And I'm looking forward to 2022 when hopefully it'll be more of a return. I don't know what that return is. I don't want to say return to normal, but better days ahead.
Yeah.
And we won't let you fully retire either.
Yeah.
Well, I know you told me it's not Mosport related or CTMP related, but you said you have a good Michael Schumacher story, Jerry.
Yeah,
so I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, because I mean, so just to set the stage, it was while I was working at Bridgestone, and again, I won't even say the year because I think it was around 97, 98. Someone can fact check it, but it was the first year that Ferrari had become a Bridgestone shod team. So in the 97, so probably would have been closer to 99, 97. We started with two teams, and all of the strong, two of the newer teams, and all of the strong teams were on Michelin at the time. But gradually, as teams saw the quality of the product, they started coming over. So this this story takes place at the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. And it, as part of our assignment, so here in Canada, for example, it was a great property for us to leverage, and we would get packages from Bridgestone in Tokyo of, here's hospitality, here's some special access passes to get into the paddock, and here are tickets to use. And I learned from one of the best of them with Sid there. Not to give everything out at once, always keep tickets in the back pocket. So I did that, and I had about...
You taught me that one, Jerry. So.
Oh, okay. There we go. And so I mean, whatever I had about 50 tickets left. It was Thursday of race weekend, and part of the process for me was to go down and meet the PR reps of each of the Bridgestone F1 teams. Welcome to the track, anything we can do. And Ferrari at the time had a brand new PR person. And so, Montreal would have been about maybe the 4th, 5th race into the season, thereabouts. And she was still kind of learning her way. And I guess somewhere along the lines, whether it was her role or someone else's, she didn't acquire enough tickets for guests that they wanted to bring to the track. And she said, do you know anywhere that I can get tickets? Because I'm trying to go to the Grand Prix office, and they're sold out, and the race is sold out. And I went, not a problem. I've got you covered. How many do you need? And, she said 20, 25, whatever it was. And I said, done. I said, when do you want them? And she says, well, if I could get them tomorrow morning, which would have been Friday morning, so that I can then deliver them to our guests. And I said, no problem. Absolutely. Happy to do it. And then she said, so how do we work out payment? And I said, don't worry about it. I said, it feels like a line out of The Godfather, but somewhere down the road, I may need a favor.
Yeah,
and
you'll be called upon to do a service.
Thank you. And I said, but we're so happy to have Ferrari running on the product that I'm happy to help. And then really jokingly, I said, however, if you could arrange to have Michael Schumacher come visit our hospitality suite on Sunday, that would be great. And I was fully expecting her just to blow me off. And she goes, and again, remember, she was new, like she was 4 or 5 races in. And she said, I'll see what I can do. We'll get this done for you. And I went and so, the next morning when I gave her the tickets, she said, it's all looked after. Michael will be there at such and such a time. And, couldn't believe it. And, we were...
Good work, Jerry.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Good work, Jerry.
Yeah. And we were nervous right up until the set time of, is he going to show and all of that. So in he comes, I think probably just the PR person with him, not much of an entourage. We had North American guests there that weekend. So the head of PR for Bridgestone Firestone, Ron, you may have met along the line Trevor Hoskins.
Yes.
Yeah, real gentleman. He was one of my reports when I was at Bridgestone. So Trevor was the MC, welcomed Michael into the group, proceeded to go through about a 2-3 minute introduction of everything that Michael had done in his career, world championships, races won, poles, on and on. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Schumacher. And the place erupted with I think we had about 150 guests there that weekend. And Michael steps up to the microphone and says, Trevor, thank you for that introduction. However, you made one big mistake. And he paused, and you could just feel like the tension coming into the room. He great driver, but had a bit of a reputation as, not necessarily always being easy to get along with. And he said, your mistake is that you forgot one very important milestone in my life. He said, my very first win in my life was in karting, and I won on Bridgestones. And he said, so I'm happy to be home again. And then, kind of launched into his thing. And I'll tell you, like as a PR person, or probably everyone in the company, you could have just run up and hugged the guy, right? And just thank you. You couldn't have scripted it better. And, and then so he did his, did his talk, and everyone was just focused on him. We had a very tight window with him. I want to say it was about 15 minutes. We had told everyone, no autographs. We can't do that. There's just too many people. And so then he starts to walk away, and then he stops and he says, I can stay for another 15, 20 minutes, and we'll do as many autographs as we can.
Wow.
And then he did it. I think, most people got what they wanted, and then he left. And I'll just never forget, like, it completely changed my perception on what he was like away from the track, and just a real professional. And so that's the story.
Very cool.
I'm guessing there should have been some Bridgestone, Firestone people hugging you after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just doing my job, Ron.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it was good. It was a fun experience.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Awesome.
Wow. Well, listen, guys, I thank you very much, both of you, for coming on the show and sharing stories, and thanks for all the work over the years that you guys both have done to promote this sport and our track, and we all appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yet again, another family that starts at the track and ends up with decades of a career in motorsport. Awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And I just gotta mention now, just kind of squeeze this last in. Sid and I have had the spotlight here, but my mom, in a number of different roles has worked for Mosport. My sister Deanne, has worked in motorsports, and worked on a lot of programs with Sid and with me, and my wife Donna. Back in 1982, when I started there, we were engaged, and like we were doing anything and everything we could just to try and bring some money into the household. And they put her to work selling souvenirs down in the old souvenir booths. So yeah, so you're right. It's been a family affair through a lot of the decades.
Absolutely.
And now you've got the next generation with Sam and with Patrick, and surprised you haven't put your dog to work out there. But no, thank you very much, guys.
Yes, she does too. Yes.
Yes.
I think creates work.
Okay.
Awesome, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.